Welcome to the Elephant TV. My name is Abdullahi and our guest today is Yobo. Welcome to the Elephant TV, Yobo.
Thank you very much.
Today we'll be talking about, the Constitution and the pastoralist and marginalized communities. Yobo, I wanted to start with, you are closely involved in the BOMAS process that leading up to the new Constitution. How can you assess the slightly over a decade of Katiba when it comes to pastoralists, pastoralism, and the minority groups?
Mr. Lake, I think I need to start by saying that pastoralists and other stakeholders actively engaged in the constitutional review process. This was because they had long been convinced that the obtaining legal, constitutional, and policy environment since Kenya's independence in 1963 did not have economic, social, political, and cultural relevance to sustain the interests, welfare, and rights of those practicing pastoralism. Now, in this regard, the constitutional process therefore provided the greatest opportunity to pastoralists to ensure a broad-based recognition of pastoralism as a viable livelihood that needed specific recognition in policy, legislative, and institutional features. Yes, I was involved, and you were too. To a great extent, I always think that you did a marvelous job through a newspaper or a magazine called The Marginalised, where you highlighted the critical issues that pastoralists needed to advocate for during the constitutional process. I'm glad with that. Now, prior to the 2010, I think this history is important to remember. Prior to the 2010 Katiba, pastoralists and especially pastoralism as something more than a livelihood was hugely misunderstood, that it was not formally and meaningfully recognized by the state and by so many other stakeholders whom pastoralists thought that could assist them achieve a meaningful existence. Now, the prevailing attitude then was that investing in pastoralism was just a waste of time. This is important to know. It's a waste of time of state resources, yet pastoralists always pointed out that the poverty levels in their regions demonstrated enough proof of their marginalization and the fact that they had suffered, and therefore the Constitution provided an opportunity for them to safeguard their rights. Stakeholders in the NGO sector underlined that the various nearly unassailable stereotypes about pastoralism colored the negative attitude of state officials towards pastoralists and pastoralism. So the Constitution needed to set this one out right. One of the stereotypes was that pastoralism was an outdated way of life and a production system that is ill adapted to modern contingencies. In this regard, it was poorly understood and therefore the natural bane of governments and administrations. Now, what happened just before Katiba was the need, for example, for pastoralists to begin to ensure that the final document that comes out of the constitutional process is based on rights. And so where we are now is a state of affairs where much has changed. We've had that recognition and immediately after the Constitution actually certifying that pastoralists, their livelihoods are meaningful and that it makes sense to the own world, then we proceeded, the state proceeded therefore to put together the relevant instruments to ensure that their rights are actually fulfilled. In this case, we had a plethora of legal, policy, and institutional frameworks that came now to rubber stamp that. And this is the very important aspect of the Constitution itself. And so the Constitution unto itself, when it was promulgated then, recognized that pastoralists and pastoralism has a place to stay and it has its own relevance. For this actually ensured that all the other legislations that would come thereafter take care of the interests of pastoralists themselves. So you would find that even within the Constitution itself, pastoralism was identified and recognized, I think, including other minorities. In Article 56, for example, the Constitution proceeds actually to mention pastoralism itself as a way of life. So all other subsequent frameworks then came into being. For example, some of these frameworks and some of those legal policy instruments have really been able to turn around the fortunes of people who are pastoralists and minorities. We have an example of the Kenya Vision 2030 that seeks to really impact on the social, economic, and cultural well-being of pastoralists and minorities. In terms of issues to do with climate change, we've had the Climate Change Act 2016 that really places squarely the position of minorities and their interests. We've also had a number of national policy on water resources management, just to say this. We've had lots of institutions that are being generated, like the Water Resource Management Authority, that specifically focuses or has a greater role to play in ensuring that the pastoralist interests in terms of environment and water resources are taken care of. But much more important, one of the greatest challenges that minorities have always suffered in this country has been the control of natural resources that are within their own regions. And therefore, when you have a Community Land Act of 2016 that specifically protects land rights, then you'd say that these are some of the positive steps we've been able to make after the Constitution. You also are aware that Community Land Act itself really provides very, very robust provisions on how protective we should be of pastoralist land rights.
So Yobo, so in that regard, then, what are some of the major, benefits aside from legal policy and institutional frameworks that that the community has benefited? And what do you think also are some of the things that people feel that they have not benefited from the Constitution, at least for these communities? A lot of the time when I have conversation with people, one of the things that comes up is, we felt that 2010 Katiba, we are seeing 2010 Katiba was like our independence. But that is also coupled with the fact that other people say that, no, it's not yet Uhuru. There are things that need to work out. What do you think, from the national government and from the county government that people celebrate and the things that people have see as challenges?
I think majorly is what I would consider to be one of the benefits is to be given the authority to be able to superintend over a number of things within your regions through the devolved system of governance. I think to a great extent that has been pretty useful, because this means then that contextual issues that impinge on decision making are really taken into account. I think this is one of the most important. As to how exactly we've been able to use this devolution itself, that's another matter we could discuss. But I think to an appreciable degree, devolution has been quite an important achievement. Quite a number of infrastructural projects, for example, have been instituted in some of the marginalized areas, which corresponds with where minorities and pastoralists come from. And I think they are fairly generating an impact in terms of access to markets, in terms of ensuring that certain services are really accessed by the communities themselves. These are important, but there are still challenges, because one of the most glaring challenges has been that even as we thought that Katiba 2010 would be the panacea for quite a lot of the challenges that we faced, people still feel that the implementation of this same Katiba has been selectively done, that the implementation has not really been honestly taken as important. Pastoralists still feel that even some of the infrastructure that is being erected in the areas are generally leading towards the natural resources that are within their jurisdictions, with very little for them to benefit because of their low educational levels. There isn't much that is happening. And one of the challenges has been that the county governments themselves have not been adequately resourced, their capacity built to the extent that they can address some of the challenges that are found within the borders of marginalized communities and pastoralists themselves. You talk of some of the challenges that have really refused to go away, like peace, and conflicts. They're still there. And the kind of reaction that we have in dealing with some of this relate to our incapacity to deal with underlying causes, etc.
Yeah, so let's speak about peace. I think when I look at the pastoralist region, two things stand out. One is the insecurity that you've mentioned. If you look at, Pokot, Samburu, Marsabit, and sometimes Isiolo, and also Garissa, Wajir, Mandera, conflict is one of those sore issues that's still there. That accompanied by the drought over the last 2 seasons, 3 now, it hasn't rained and people are still worried about, the April rain. So these 2 issues, I think, are some of the most, glaring challenge that we see even post-devolution. How do you think both the national government and the county government can work in addressing it?
Yeah, I think the persistent challenge of conflicts has been like that because we've not fairly appreciated the strong linkage that it has with the drought, for example, and other underlying causes. And I think one of the critical failures in Kenya's system of drought management is its slow response and its inability, for example, to even take heed of its own, what they call early warning alerts that they give. Today, you would guess that in the next 3 years, we would have another cycle of drought, but you'd find that the response to that takes really longer, to the extent that sometimes we really have to rely on donors and all that to be able to tell us, now it's time to move on. This is also linked to the capacity that we have at the county level, for instance, to be able to respond to some of these challenges. Most county governments do not have the requisite capacity actually to move with the speed that it requires. And therefore, apart from those capacities, it's lack of appreciation of the challenges that some of these things are really causing communities. We've had a number of institutions in this regard. We have the National Drought Management Authority and all that. But you constantly feel that we are going back on the same things. The circles are pretty clear since all these previous years, but there isn't something tangible that we're really making out of it. Conflicts in pastoral areas cannot, for example, be attributed to a single factor, and we do know this. So this multidimensional character of the conflict in the regions, however, related to resources or another, need to be linked to the capacity for us and an analysis of what we are losing when some of these conflicts are arising. And so these are some of the challenges that we are facing.
Yeah, so let's speak about the transboundary nature of the pastoralist areas, right? You have Mandera, which is at it borders Ethiopia and Somalia. You have Marsabit that borders Ethiopia, and then you have Pokot that borders Ethiopia and Turkana. So whatever happens on one side affects the other. But how can some of these counties take advantage of some of the opportunities on the other side? Marsabit, Isiolo, road has been tarmacked and it goes all the way, to the border. So there has to be some good cross-border trade that can be done, good policies that can be adopted, or planning that, these counties can begin working, of course, in conjunction with the national government and also some of the non-governmental multilateral institutions. How do you see that, having worked on, pastoral issues on the continent? You organized one of the inaugural Kenya Pastoralist Week, where people from all these pastoral regions, not just in the neighboring countries but elsewhere, what are some of the best practices that some of these counties can adopt that can be useful?
Thank you. I think that's an interesting question, because I happen to be following a report of the delegation of Mandera, Marsabit County to Ethiopia at a particular time, where what really happened is that the delegation went there to see what opportunities are there in respect to trade and investment opportunities that would come from the Ethiopian side, and how perhaps they would be able to implement the same. There are huge opportunities across the borders from different points of view. One, in terms of getting investors from those kind of countries, for example, in Ethiopia, to come to Marsabit and invest in areas that we're not, we don't have the advantage. And at the same time, enabling those areas to be markets for our own goods. We are particularly happy that Ethiopia is quite ahead in terms of developing its leather industry. It has one of the biggest tanneries within the region. And this is something that Kenyans can really learn from. And I'm glad that the Marsabit County delegation that went there learned quite a bit from them. The challenge always gets to be at the point of implementation. If you have bilateral agreements, you have protocols and all that, who really follows that on earth? Do we have a proper secretariat? Are we convinced enough that we really need it, to the extent that we have a standing secretariat that is really pursuing these elements? One would be afraid that, given the electionary period that we're getting into, 2 years before the elections, many of these things get, pushed aside because either they were driven on the basis of the goodwill of a particular governor and all that. So a sense of organization on our part would be important for us to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that are there. The Ethiopian mission, for example, tried to forge, partnerships with our Kenyan people based on some special status agreement that was signed a couple of years ago. And I think it is up to the Marsabit County in this situation to be able to really follow through, get a number of experts, work with the Chamber of Commerce, so that periodically, we would see that there are milestones that are being covered. In terms of when you go back to Turkana and Uganda, for example, the sibling relationship between the Turkana and Karamojong is something that we really need to be able to exploit. We shouldn't be seeing each other basically as fighting over cattle raiding and stuff like that. And one of the things is, since they share nomadic pastoralism as an economic venture, for instance, the Turkana would be in a position to ensure that they can have a trade relationship that is stronger with Uganda. I'm particularly happy in this context that the Turkana have been selling fish, particularly to Uganda from Lake Turkana, and they also do it right up to DRC Congo. There's been some of the challenges, but these are the lessons that we need to take a notch higher to ensure that we take advantage of these kind of opportunities. When it comes to Somali, I think basically we did learn at a given point when, because of the menace of Al-Shabaab and the border was closed, actually Mandera really got it very hard, because trade being stopped between Mandera and Somalia really impacted heavily on people. You realize that the border towns of Bulahawa, for example, Bulahawa, which is in Somalia, and Suftu in Ethiopia, these are really conjoined towns with Mandera. And that really tells you the need for us to work closely together. The manner through which, in which these towns are conjoined tells you that when trade or borders are closed, then we lose quite a number of things as a lesson. And I believe that there's really quite a bit that we could benefit, and the county government of Madeira particularly could do. And it all boils down to implementation process, studies being carried out, developing stronger stakeholder support networks. If you want better studies to be committed, to be undertaken, the NGO world can support in this case. And I think quite a number of county governments are not really very gifted in looking for this support. They wait for donors to come to them, NGOs to come to them, even beg them that we want to do A, B, C, D. And I think this is one of the challenges we really need to sort it out.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you. And finally, Yobo, everything ultimately boils down to politics. We're going to an election in 2022. What are your key pastoralism marginal communities platforms, be it on either side of the coalition? What do you see? What do you think should be the principal 2 or 3 issues that pastoralists that pastoralist community should demand or should push for as a platform for the next government during this electoral cycle?
Thank you. Like I said before, one of the positive things that we got from the Katiba was devolved governance. I think this has really helped most minorities because the government and services come closer to the people. I think we would expect, if I was a pastoralist, I would request leading contenders, for example, to address the extent to which they would resource county governments, secure county governments, make sure county governments are really people-driven to the extent that they are serving the interests of people within those regions. I think this has been the challenge, that even when people are, legislating in parliament, they should not be tampered, with the security of some of the, the devolved governments that we have. One of the other challenges really is the extent to which these devolved units should be resourced. The other thing really is to see the fidelity of some of the contenders, the leading contenders, to basic rights, community rights, group rights, and that is entrenched in the Constitution. One of the things that people hardly speak about are questions of historical injustices. And in fact, even as we see the government grappling with all the issues related to peace, conflict, and all that, we forget the underlying issues of marginalization that were very, very directed and specific. And so, if we were to have better commitment and understanding that through affirmative action, for example, we would be able to address some of the historical injustices that we found in the economic arena, then we would be home and dry. There are quite a number of issues related to even the equalization fund that has never really been addressed. And when you look around all the campaigns that are happening, there's always the occasional trip to pastoralist areas, the occasional trip, but you'd find that the contenders are really moving in dominant communities areas, telling you that the issues of pastoralists are really fringe issues that do not deserve the attention that is required, and it really behooves of pastoralists themselves to be able to make this noise and say, hey, you are neglecting us. Sometimes it's a bit embarrassing to note that it is those people who are supporting the contenders who go to Nairobi to look for them rather than them coming down.
Yeah, I mean, like I was having these conversations, sorry to cut you short, with a friend, and I was telling him why we, somebody like, the outgoing governor of Mandera go to Nairobi to endorse a candidate instead of the other way around for them to come and seek the vote. Nairobi, why would Nairobi, a place that hasn't served you for over 50 years, it's only over the last 10 years of the Katiba that you're getting even the recognition, the funding, and the support. But, the irony is not lost that, the tempo, it's like, Uhuru Kenyatta, going to London to seek, to get to seek an endorsement.
Absolutely. I mean, it's that really tells you. And to the extent that you really want even to form your own party in a corner that really doesn't, is not regarded so much, tells you it's almost a futile strategy. The issue is, if you really recognize or endorse somebody, on what basis are you doing that? I mean, is there an agreement? We've had a history of pastoralist elders actually signing an agreement with politicians, and those agreements were just ignored.
Yeah.
I'm capable of mentioning names here, and there are people who are bitter about that,
Yeah.
And we don't seem to learn out of this.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. We'll leave it at that for now, but thank you so much, Yobo, for your time and your insight. I hope we'll be able to get another chance to speak to you. Thank you once again, Yobo.